This episode is proudly brought to you by Optimum Financial Services Group. Optimum has the expertise to guide you through investment, tax, retirement, and estate planning, with a tailored solution to your individual needs. Our objective is to provide you with an optimum solution to protect your wealth. Optimum has expertise in medical aid, legal services, asset finance, and short-term insurance, as well as specialized services in commercial, marine, aviation, and personal liability. Don't choose the average, choose Optimum. Optimum Financial Services Group is an authorized financial services provider. Good afternoon to you today. Welcome. Today is the 63rd episode of High Performance Teams. My name's Alex MacPhail, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. Today, I have a repeat guest, but a wonderful guest. We had a bit of trouble last time. Mandy Hickson, a former fighter pilot with the Royal Air Force. She has 2 operational combat tours in Iraq, flying in the Tornado GR4, and we had some sound issues with a wonderful conversation, so I'm going to try and pick up the pieces, fill you in on the gaps where it all went garbled last time, and we can get into the weeds about flying combat aircraft, operating in a frontline fighter, working in a team, writing books, motivational speaking, being a parent, and of course, the latest thing that's going on with Mandy is she is reading her own audiobook version of the book, An Officer, Not a Gentleman. I'm very excited to have Mandy here once again. So please stay with us. Remember, this is your conversation too. Post your questions, comments. Tell me where in the world you're joining us from, and let's get into it. This is High Performance Teams. Hello, Mandy. How are you doing today?
Hi, Alex. I'm loving that funky music. I'm sort of going down there to that then.
Yeah, that was my effort right in the beginning to try and create a jingle. You know, if you've got a computer at home, you can fiddle with lots of great tools these days. And one of the tools I was fiddling with was GarageBand on my MacBook.
Yay! I know it. I thought I recognised that. Yeah, getting into the groove.
Yeah, it was fun. So how's it going in nice sunny UK today?
It is gorgeous. I've done a beautiful 10K walk, and I'm all raring to chat to yourself, your good self.
Nice. Well, it's nice to have you back. It was a pity about the sound quality last time. So some things we're just going to talk about again. But you know what? I've noticed that you put a couple of pilots in the room together and they can just chit chat. And it might be the same old stories. It could be new stories. But nevertheless, time passes quickly and we have a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Have you been in an airplane recently? Obviously, COVID is stopping normal travel. But have you flown a small aircraft recently?
I haven't flown anything at all, actually, since March. So... yeah, I think that's the longest that my feet have been rooted to the ground since I was about 17, which is shocking, isn't it?
It is. It's kind of weird. Where did you fly in March? Light aircraft?
No, that was flying back from France, actually, bringing COVID and sharing COVID to the world. As I was.
And when last did you pilot an aircraft yourself?
That would be, probably the January before. So about a year, just over a year before that, I'd stopped. I'd been flying as a volunteer reservist for the cadets. We have... a fantastic system in the UK where we fly youngsters, and I've been doing that as a volunteer.
Okay, it's nice to keep your hand in. I must say, I got strapped into an airplane this time last week here in the Eastern Cape, and it was a nice small aircraft, a wonderful aircraft manufacturer. Sling it's a South African company. They built these beautiful, robust little airplanes, lightweight, fuel efficient, and they go far and quickly.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got involved with this flying school to go on a flight, and we tried to demo a live flight from this platform, actually, and just talk through what a live flight would be, having comments, questions, and there was no advertising, there was no build-up, we just switched the camera on and taxied out, and we had 1 viewer and then 2, and then by the time we were at the holding point, there was 28 viewers on board, and people, are you going to get airborne? Are you going to, and then we had, we had a mag drop. Well, they don't have mags, they got lanes, but we had a electrical anomaly, and of course the airplane was still working, but you can't go with one of the lanes not working, so that's the reason for the mag drop check. And we taxied back, and you could see, look, we tried to reset it, and it was a real live, it's a good indication of what happens out there. Things don't always work, and you have to make good decisions. And as we turned around and taxied back, 2 things happened. One, there was a puff adder that started taxiing across the taxiway in front, or slithering across the taxiway in front of us. The person I was flying with is a game ranger of 12 years, now become a pilot. So we started talking about this wildlife in the Eastern Cape. That was quite fun. But straight away, you could see that when we were taxiing back in, the numbers just went from 25, 20, 15, 12. When they knew the flight was over, the numbers started dwindling rapidly.
Oh, what a shame. What a shame. You'll do it again, though. Do it again, and I'm sure you'll
Yeah.
have some more.
Yeah, we'll have some fun. But I must say, even by the end of that day, just strapping into a little airplane and hands on the control, just that feeling of buzz of, moving, taxiing around, it felt like we flew. It really felt like we won the day, even though we didn't actually get airborne. But anyway, it's great to fly again. I also don't fly too often anymore, so that was a nice experience, and I'm sure it's coming again. Have you got any plans to fly small airplanes still?
Well, actually, there's a really sweet little connection that's going on at the moment. I've got quite a lot of followers on Twitter, and there's a young girl on Twitter who's just got her private pilot's license, and she said, and I said, oh, now that you're qualified, I'd love to come up. And she was like, yes, please, that would make my life. So I'm going to make that happen, which would be really lovely. So I'll get over there and hopefully get airborne with her, which would be fun.
That's cool.
So,
yeah, nice. And so is in the UK, is all things sort of returning to normal, all flying training and all stuff happening?
Yeah. So, very slowly. So my husband's in the airline training world, and it's a very slow pickup, basically. He's started to do the odd simulator more for currency than for anything else. And yeah, I mean, the military training system's carrying on as per normal. But it's just, it seems that we're all, I think everyone's just waiting for this second lockdown to happen. It's been talked about and it seems to be imminent. So I think everyone's just waiting. Yeah.
We're waiting. There's a lot of this. There's a lot of that going on in general. We've got the sense of in a few months we'll know more. In a few months we'll know more. But when does that no more or that few months happen? We've got this. It's the story of our lives right now. Hey?
It is. But you've got to look to the future. Where get back to some level of, I think some level of new normality. And I think that's the whole thing. When we look at this podcast space and things like that, actually it's about saying, let's look to the future. Let's look at what we can do. You and I would never have connected with you being out there in South Africa. I've been speaking to India, Canada, America. I'm doing a speech for some school children in Australia next month. And I love that. And that is something that has opened up as a consequence of this, because the virtual space has become the norm. Then people aren't saying, let's fight that. And I think that's a very important thing.
That's cool. And as we talk in real time now, please, everyone, you can bring your questions. I want to just put that up there. You can see Alex van Oorsveen has joined us, and he said, great story, Alex. Now, Alex was the leader of the team when I was in the Silver Falcons. He was my first leader of the aerobatic team. So it's really a privilege for me to have people like that, these high caliber people that were part of my life to join in and say hello. Alex, anytime you want to share a war story as we go along, that's great. But what it makes me think of right away is, and this has come to me a few times in the last few weeks with these stories and photos that remind you. You can see a photo or think of an event of flying, and it can take you right back to that time in your life. A photograph of, and we'll put some up your photos shortly, a photograph of you sitting on the wing of a tornado rewinds 25 years of your life, and you're in the moment again.
It is. And actually, I've always been a prolific photographer, not of any quality, I might add. I've always been obsessed by capturing the moment. And of course, the whole of my life, people have just taken the mickey out of me for it. And then suddenly here we are now. The fact I have got probably about 50 photo albums in my loft, and I got these out. And that was what helped me write the book, was because actually I couldn't remember the details, but I had the photos to capture it, and therefore you could remember all of the specifics. And I think that's really important. So, we do so much now with it because it's on our phones, but I always was there with my film, getting it printed off at the photo shop, afterwards. So yeah, it's worth it now.
Yeah. I must say, it is something I've always appreciated, but I've never been that diligent with taking photos. But if I'm in a nice area, if it's a holiday or if it's just a new location for a short while, like I am now, I'm taking photos daily just because this is temporary. So I know that it's going to come to an end. And what I find myself doing, there's a river that I'm just across the road. So I go down to the river once or twice a day and just get a photo. Today it's gray, tomorrow it's blue, then it's bright, and then it's windy. But just get a photo of all of them so I can have a bit of a snapshot of what's going on. It's quite a nice way to keep track of your memories.
It is, absolutely. Yeah, I'm obsessed by it.
So if you go to your book now, we're going to jump around again today. I can feel. If you go to your book and you go with the reading,
Do you mean
Yeah.
this book? Wait a minute.
Wait, hang on. Let's just do this. There we go. That book.
An Officer, Not a Gentleman. Yes.
Wonderful. Give me the update. So last time you said you were expecting 200 sales and you had 1,500 sales. Where are you at now with sales?
Just under 2,500.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's that. Oh, I just give a shout out now. So one of my great friends, Robin, has just joined us. Robbie Kane. So he's written a lovely question there. What was the catalyst to write the book as a biography instead of your high performance view? So
good question, Robin.
It's a really, really good question, and I haven't actually primed him to write it either. I just want to say that. So initially, when I started, so I do a lot of keynote speaking at conferences and the like, and every time I would do a speech, someone would say, have you got a book? And I'd go, no. And I kept saying no. And then I started saying not yet. And I think when you say the words not yet, it opens up the world of possibility. And it suddenly changes the way you're framing things in your mind from an absolute no way to I might do it. And of course, once I said not yet enough, then I started to look at opportunities of how I might write the book. And initially, I started to get all the stories down and together. And I thought, oh, this is going towards a high performance view. And I thought, right, so I'm going to write up, each little story. There's a little vignette. And then I'm going to put in the leadership lessons and the team lessons from it. And then I thought, there's an awful lot of books out there like that, actually.
Sure.
And there are a lot of autobiographies as well. But I just felt it flowed better with me being able to slip in the learning as well. So, Rob, I hope that's answered your question. And Rob does feature in my book as well. He comes under the name Puppy. So, yeah.
Cool.
If anyone's read there we go. You are very honoured to have Puppy on board today.
Thank you for joining, Puppy. Thanks for your question. And it's a thought or a construct that has gone through my head as well, because I've been, I had this idea of a book for a long time. So I recognize it's almost like a project or like a business card. As you say, you go to events, have you got a book out? No, you don't. But if you did, that was the place where maybe you hand out 20 or 50, but your story then continues on because that book gets passed on, or certainly it goes further than the person sitting in the audience. So I recognize this as a value and I wanted to do that myself. But what is that book? What does it look like? So did you draw a little map of it all? Are these little vignettes? That's what I'm busy with now. But then you change your mind at the time, don't you?
Yeah, I'd like to say, it was all very planned out, very very like my career. No, I've always described myself as agricultural, and I like to grow organically, and that's basically what I did in the book. I worked really closely with a good friend of mine who is a journalist, who is an absolute wordsmith as well. So you've got to realise your own strengths, and me getting my words onto paper is not one of my strengths. So I could have done it as basically a dialogue, but I didn't want that. And so working with him, and we worked really closely together. So he and I would chat, he'd write it, I'd edit it, I'd say, that's not my voice. He'd go, no, you're right. We'd tweak it, we'd work. And eventually we came out with this, and there was a lot more stories in there actually, but we did a final massive cull at the end because it had got up to about 110,000 words. Okay. And he said, these are all not relevant. I like that story. I want that. He's like, no, where's the learning? Where's the learning? So I do think, use your strengths for it. Use people around you. And if you are a great wordsmith, then fantastic. But for me, it wasn't my strength. And so I've actually utilised loads of different people in my entire network, from friends and colleagues. And even down to the audiobook, that was putting the feelers out, and somebody came back and said, yeah, I will. And actually, I'd love to hear you record it. So in fact, use my studio. I'll do the editing for a really reasonable price. And I'd be honoured to do it. I thought, happy days.
So what we have right here is two Air Force pilots talking about writing books.
Boring, isn't it?
No, not at all. We're gonna nerd out in this a little longer because I love this conversation. So you go from flying a tornado to writing a book. How do you get to the point where it becomes an audiobook? Tell me about the process of thinking about an audiobook or actually doing it. What is the work of recording an audiobook?
Well, I think personally, if you have written an autobiography, it sits very naturally in the audiobook space because everyone that has read it has gone, I can hear your voice. And I think, oh my goodness, that's a lovely thing, isn't it? Well, can you imagine? You can really hear my voice because now I'm reading it. So yeah, that's when I put that out then. I thought, yeah, I fancy doing it. So I bought my microphone. Here we are. I thought I'm going to sit in a darkened cupboard with duvets all around me. And then, do you know what? Again, I'm not a sound engineer. Look to your network, you know, and that's why I put it out there. And I just thought, actually, do you know what? I need to, it's going to stress me more than anything. I need to do this professionally if I'm going to do it. So the gods answered, and Simon came to the forefront, my friend, this chap who has a studio in his garden, and he said, pop it down. So we did. So basically, I thought it was going to take a lot longer than it did. But I managed.
So the way you're speaking, it sounds like it's finished. Are you finished recording?
Done it, finished it.
How long did it take?
In two sittings, basically. They were quite long. It's ended up being just under 8 hours of recorded time. And it was quite funny because we recorded the, I don't know if anyone out there has read my book, but the prologue is a really dramatic scene when we got shot at by a surface-to-air missile in Iraq. And when I started recording it on the audiobook, I read it like a narrator, and I was speaking very professionally as if I was doing a tannoy on an aeroplane. And basically we got to chapter 2 and I was speaking like this, and I was back to being Mandy. And we went, oh, Mandy, we've got to go and re-record chapter 1 and the prologue because your voice is now coming out. So we only re-recorded 2 chapters. But the rest of it was really, it was very, very easy to do, and to work with a professional is the way forward. It was great, actually.
Oh, nice. Okay.
I have never been to South Africa. I would absolutely love to. You know what? If you guys are happy to host me, I will be down there as soon as coronavirus is out of the way. And maybe Alex and I could go flying.
Yeah, maybe we definitely can. That's nothing to laugh about. We can set it up very, very easily.
Yeah.
Great question. I didn't know how to bring him in there because Craig's a friend of mine and one of my flying instructors when I was a student pilot in the Air Force way back in 2000.
Wow.
So thanks for joining us, Craig. And Sue is joining us from Australia, and she's saying, getting inspired with some bravery for my weekend abseil. She's setting up an abseiling and outdoor adventure business in Australia right now, and your talks has inspired her. So thank you for that, Mandy. Tumelo joining from LinkedIn saying, have you ever got a chance to choose the aircraft you want to fly? If so, after how long since you were in the industry? And this goes back to our conversation last time. So maybe you can share that. That's a good question to segue into your start in the RAF. It was quite easy. You put your name down on the form and tomorrow you flew the plane. That was it, Mandy?
Yeah, you just tick a box and you get to fly it. It's lovely, really easy. It's a little bit more complex than that. So for any of us that didn't see the first session, so Alex and I had a great chat, and I was just telling him how when I first tried to join the Air Force, women weren't allowed to be pilots in the Air Force. So that was quite a big stumbling block. And then in my second year at university, I'd been flying with a club at university. They changed the rules. So I applied to join, and then I failed all the tests. You're allowed to take them twice. I failed them a second time, not so good. And then eventually, after a lot and complicated process, I was taken on as an air traffic controller. But we managed to persuade the Air Force to take me on as a test case because I've been doing particularly well with my flying, and we couldn't understand why a lot of women were failing the aptitude test. So eventually, with a lot of people on my side and a lot of support, we managed to get the Air Force to look at their process for recruiting and their aptitude tests. And I was taken on to basically see how far I could get before I failed, I think, which was a bit of a shocker. But how did I get to choose my aircraft? To answer your question specifically there, Tumelo. When you're going through fast jet training at RAF Valley in Anglesey, where Rob, who's on the call with us today, was the boss recently of the flying training school, you're selected firstly on your ability. Are you single seat qualified or twin seat qualified? Now, that's not relevant anymore because we only now have single seat aircraft. But at the time, we had the Tornado GR4, the Tornado F3, we had the Jaguar and the Harrier. So those people that had done exceptionally well on the course, they would get single seats recommended. Myself, and I did not. I no expectation to either. And out of the Tornado F3 and the GR4, I definitely preferred the ground attack mode. I love the precision. I love the planning. I love the execution of a mission on time, on target. I much preferred it to the dogfighting world. And it seems that, there were very different people that preferred each different role, actually. So, I chose Tornado, and I was lucky to get it.
So yeah, choosing that aircraft, it is a beautiful airplane. It's one that I really, really love too. It just looks so good. Looks like it does.
There you go.
Yeah, that's it. It's let's do this so you can get the whole picture in there. That's the Tornado there behind Mandy.
Which way do you move? It's all the
Yeah,
wrong.
I'm glad it's not just me. I do the same thing. But is it over? No, sorry, this one. Yeah.
Exactly.
But getting to choose, well, firstly, you got into flying to get onto pilot's course. That's the first thing. And then, you get this choice of being a fighter pilot, and then you get this choice of multi-seat or single seat. There's so many, you really are at the sharp end of the wedge. Still have a choice right at the end. It's just fantastic. But anyway, you got the airplane that you wanted. But I agree, this not only is the precision and the planning, but the low-level flying in a Tornado must have been amazing. Rather than sitting at 25,000 for a dogfight, you're a mud mover, but you're having fun getting to that place.
Yeah, absolutely. And for myself particularly, flying in Scotland is stunning. If any of you have ever been up to Scotland, but it's very glacial, and you have these huge mountains going down into these beautiful lochs. You'll have heard of the Loch Ness Monster. Well, we never saw Nessie, I'm afraid to say, but you'd be flying along, right on the edges of these lochs, and it is absolutely exquisite scenery. I love the fact that you're flying down valleys and you'll see walkers above you. You can give them a little salute, give them a little wave as you go past as well, and they don't know you're there. And I always love that, because you could surprise, especially if they weren't the photographers. There's certain places in the UK that you'll see photographers. One's called the Machynlleth Loop in Wales, and it's a famous spot, and you'll fly that down there, and you'll look up and there'll all be these photographers there. But in Scotland, there'll be real unsuspecting hill walkers who are just enjoying the stroll and the peace and quiet of the countryside, when suddenly a pair of tornadoes come swooping by. And that's fantastic. And I did quite a lot of that flying with Rob as well, so it's lovely to have a wingman here.
Nice. Well, talking about wingmen, so here's put that picture up of you where it still says Flight Lieutenant Wells, and there's two of you there in the two seats, but you get a sense of that air intake. It's massive. I mean, it's bigger than your leg. It's a big aircraft. I don't have all the pictures today, but tell us about the role of two aircrew on board. Maybe just talk about this communication and teamwork within the one airplane. I know you got 2, 3, 4, 5 airplanes, but within the one aircraft. Tell us about this role.
Yeah, so within the one aircraft. So I used to be Flight Lieutenant Wells, which is why I'm proudly sitting there on the wing. But that's with Michel Dupont, who was a French navigator who was on exchange with us. And it's phenomenal working with someone. So one thing that they try to do very early on in your career, generally on a squadron, and particularly if you're in an operational mode, is they tend to pair you with someone with a lot of experience. And that lovely lesson for businesses, can you imagine having a mentor sitting 2 meters behind you at all time, guiding you? And that's really powerful. So, you are doing very different roles, but you've got to work incredibly closely together. So especially when you're on things like a target run or something like that, it's very clinical, but it's absolutely working together. And this hierarchical gradient, which is an interesting one, because when you look at airlines and things like that, obviously you've got the captain and the first officer, and you're both doing the same role. You're both there to fly the airplane. But with the Tornado, you're in different roles. But if you've got someone with sort of 15 years experience sitting behind you and you've got 2 months, you would be churlish not to listen to them, because they have seen a lot of pilots make the mistakes that you're about to.
Okay, so maybe just back up before we go too deep there. So what is that role? You are operating the airplane, and the person behind you, what are they doing?
So they used to be called a navigator, and then they became renamed as a weapons systems operator, because it actually depicted what they were doing. Because once we got upgrades to the aircraft, actually so much of the navigation side of it was taken care of, and actually what they were doing was operating the weapons systems. So it became more relevant to rename them that. So I always used to say that the pilot was simply the taxi driver to get the man in the back or the lady in the back to the right spot in the sky, and so they could do their business. And I think it's that mutual respect that's really important, because I think when people talk about aviation, it's always pilots this, pilots that. It's not. It's crew. It's the whole team, isn't it? And you know that as well more than anyone. You're not going to get airborne without the ground crew, without the ops team, without the catering, without everybody. And it's that working as cogs in a big machine. But going specifically to this, you're flying the aircraft. They don't even have a stick in the back. So if something happens to you, they are ejecting. So their life at all times is quite literally in your hands. And Yeah, I got a lovely little dit I'd love to share with you, actually, was when we were flying in Iraq once. And let's just say I was rather desperate for the toilet. And the guy in the back seat decided to start taking the mickey out of me for this and start making waterfall noises, much humor, really funny. And I was going, actually, you know what, I'm getting quite desperate. And he was like, yeah, psh, I'm like, oh, relax. I'm like, and then he could hear me start hyperventilating. And you could hear it suddenly changed in his mind from I'm making her, distracting her and actually annoying her to she's got to land this aircraft. And actually, do you know what? She might be getting a bit distracted now because I'm going. I actually got quite poorly after the flight, but it was fascinating him suddenly going, okay, Mandy, focus. Because I'm thinking, you don't want me to be distracted at this moment now.
Yeah, you can't land this plane without me.
Exactly
so that's true.
Exactly that.
Okay. But that's it is nice, that teamwork you mentioned in airline as well. Part of the talks that I give is also roles. There's a nice section you can spend 15 minutes talking about roles. And although the two pilots have the same role of operating an aeroplane, there's also, like on the long international flights, I see the roles as being, you got your primary crew and your secondary crew, and it doesn't matter on the day, but different to how you operate in the fast jet, where you've got a pilot and a wizzo. This would be, I could be the primary crew landing today, and next week I'm the secondary crew taking the bad sleep, making the bed. So there's also that role dynamic that changes, even though you are in this position, qualified, ready for the job. Today you're serving as a backup, a bit like a bench player on the team as well. You have a good role to play, especially in like a game like rugby, where you need those extra men. It's not like soccer if you get injured, but rugby you need those extra legs to come on at the right time. So it's a great topic, this role. But we're getting lots of invites here. People are joining and saying, "Listen, you come to Cape Town. We've got a place for you to stay." Thanks, Jeremy.
Jeremy, that's it.
Wonderful. So Sue's asking again.
Yeah, how do you do it?
What's your top tip? Because I think jumping off a mountain is kind of fearful. So, but tell us about that story, being shot at. So now you're 24, you finished your training, you qualified, ready for it, and you go off on a tour. I don't know if you were shot at in the first or the second tour, but anyway, tell us the story of being shot at, because that's real and that's fearful.
Times, actually, I got shot at by guns once. The anti-aircraft artillery, so the AAA, and we were flying along, and there were lots of little black smoke clouds, and we were like, oh my goodness, they're actually firing at us. So that was a wake-up call. But the time that we got engaged by surface-to-air missile, I was actually on my final tour out in there. So I've been there 3 times before, but I'm only 3 years into flying the jet at this stage. And we were on a night flying trip. I was going home the next day. And literally just before we got to the border, it'd been a really quiet area as well. So we were in a relaxed frame of mind, actually. Sure. And I was sort of thinking about going home, and the fact I'd lost loads of weight. Oh, yes, Rob, lost loads of weight. I was looking good. I was about to buy a new dress. I was thinking about that when suddenly my navigator just went, "Brake right." And I literally responded for this very, very practiced maneuver that we had done so many times in training. And he popped the flares out. And basically, he happened to be looking through his night vision goggles and had seen a surface-to-air missile launch, but it was in a heat-seeking mode. So we hadn't got all of the full radar, the fact that we've got a radar homing and warning receiver, and we hadn't picked up that it was looking at us. It was sent in this very, we call it a low probability of kill mode, but it pretty successful, actually. It looked like it was locked onto us. It was heading directly towards us. And once we put the flares out and I did the maneuver, it took off flares and it exploded about 2 miles from the jet. And it was really interesting because fear. Did I feel fearful? No, not at all. And you don't when you're flying, I think. It's only retrospectively, and you probably have this, Alex, haven't you, where something's happened, be it an emergency. We are trained to deal with it. And that's where your training comes in. It becomes automatic. So a hideous incident where I had an awful landing where we ended up aquaplaning in Canada. And again, your hands go to the right places to make the right switch selections, to do the correct actions, because you've practiced it in the simulator. Sure. And that's where flying comes into its own, I think, on dealing with things. So going back to the fear, did I feel fearful? No. Afterwards, landing and in Goose Bay as well in Canada, when we'd apparently down the runway, yes, I thought, that was as close as it's ever come. And actually someone did want us dead at that point. So that is very real. But again, you're not fearful at that point, because if we live our lives wrapped by fear, then we would do nothing. And so that's why it's so important that, I hate to use the phrase, we feel the fear and we do it anyway, but please do, because otherwise we back off from things. And I got asked to go to walk up Kilimanjaro last October. Can't believe it. So rooftop.
Did you get to the top?
Pardon?
You make it to the top?
Boom. Yeah.
Nice.
Even with a horrific stomach bug.
Oh, wow. Well done. That's it's quite a feat, that last bit where you have to go in the morning and surface and come back down. You basically see the sunrise and turn around again.
Well, we had no sunrise because we had a whiteout. We had literally horizontal snow, very unusual for October. And I was very, very poorly with a very upset stomach.
But you did it.
I'm not going to go into too many details, but let's just say
you made it.
Many rocks on the way up.
Well, I don't know what's going on in Perth, but certainly you can do some abseiling. Sue is going to host you in Perth too. So there you go, Mandy.
I'm telling you, trips all over the world here. I tell you, I'm going to set up this live tour, bringing my book all over the world.
Book tour. The book tours aren't what they used to be. Now you can create your own book tour. You can set up your own. And this is actually something I wanted to talk to you about. Is this idea that you can create a story out of LinkedIn, out of YouTube, out of whichever platform. You can build your own engine of a story. You can create it into something more formal. It can become a book, and then you can share the story of your book, and you can generate a buzz around your book. Quite apart from traditional publishing and book, these publishing houses and how they promote you on their tour. You can almost create your own little storm around it too. Are you finding success doing that? You mentioned you had some sales from an interview, from a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable actually. It's a fascinating one. So I didn't manage to get a publisher, so I thought, right, that's not an issue. Feel the fear, do it anyway. Went onto Amazon, self-published, and I popped it on LinkedIn. Had I think I was up to about 50,000 views. It was shared by 68 people, of which about 6 of them were CEOs of businesses, of banks and things like that. People who had heard me speak 8 years ago were sharing, going, fantastic, Mandy's finally released her book. I'm thinking, 8 years ago I spoke to that company, but they remembered it, and they remembered certain stories. So there's a story I tell in my book about teamwork, and that's why it's lovely Rob's on, because he was part of that. I was about to fail fast jet training, and we were cycling around around this parade square, on our bikes, and we were practicing something I just couldn't seem to nail in the air, which was battle turns, flying in formation at low level.
So what is this? What is this? Explain the battle turn, because this sounds exciting.
Okay, so basically, very final stages of fast jet training. You're putting everything together, and you had to go off in a pair of aircraft. And an instructor would get airborne as the enemy. He would try to get behind you into sort of 6 o'clock position to simulate shooting you down. And if you are a singleton, you've got a blind spot. You can't see into that space. So you will probably not succeed. But if you've got a wingman, suddenly you've got that 360 vision. You can see the whole of them, the whole of the area behind them, and you can work together really, really efficiently. But it means you must coordinate your turns. And this is where battle turns come in. So if I'm flying like this, I can't just turn to the left. We're 2 singletons. So thinking ahead, if I'm turning to the left up in the head, you both pull up. You would cross at a perpendicular angle, and then you roll out in perfect formation. And the joy of that is that suddenly you have the mutual support throughout the maneuver, and you're there immaculately in position ready. And that's where I was failing. I was always in the wrong place. And I used to sit in my bedroom, because what happens when we're stressed? We tend to isolate ourselves. And we've seen this a lot during lockdown, where people working from home are getting more and more pressured, and we get more and more fixated on the task in hand. And we have a tendency just to keep on doing it in the same way. And that's exactly what I was doing. I'd get my cardboard cockpit out. I'm sure you're very familiar with one of those clicking switches, practicing, doing my checks, making radio calls. And actually, there was a knock on my door, and it was Rob and a couple of the other course mates who basically said, right, come on, let's go out. And we went down to this parade square, and we were cycling around it basically on our bikes, sort of pretending to be aeroplanes without the vertical separation, because it's not Harry Potter. Okay. And suddenly I thought, oh my gosh, this is so easy. And I'd been stuck in a rut, and I just thought that what we needed to do when we're stressed, when we can't work something out, is just keep on practicing it in the same way. It's about that blended learning. And it's something that's really not just aviation, but into industry as a whole, that actually, if we blend our learning and we really try to focus on the different types of learners, from auditory, kinesthetic, visual learners, then actually what we can do is create a much successful learning platform. And that's what the guys did without even realizing it. We were trying it in a different way, and suddenly I passed the trip and we carried on the course. And if it hadn't been down to them, and the lovely thing was with this was I'd actually written a letter to my station commander saying, I'd quite like to move out of the mess because I'd quite like some of my own space. And he'd written back and gone, no, you can't. Your team everything and you'll need them. And I thought, oh my word, how that came to fruition. Because if I'd have moved out the mess, I would have never been that core member of the team, and I would have never really had that opportunity. So
there is something, there's definitely something in this being in the mess and being in close quarters, especially in a fighter squadron. They tend to all be a bit closer together than at a transport squadron, more seniors. I've seen that as well, just in my time. And going to this battle turns at the end of my pilot's training, we also ended up in a holding pattern, as I told you last time. There's 3 choices. Well, you got your 4th choice because you got your 3rd choice plus a holding before you get to your 3rd choice. So I called it my 4th choice. But in that time, we had about 2 months of fiddling around on the basic trainer, the Pilatus Astra. And one of the things is we practiced these battle formations, and it was a lot of fun. So I'm interested. So practically, you got on this bicycle and you just did a whole bunch of left-right turns in formation, and it just clicked.
4 or 5 was there, and they're going, Mandy, 30 port, 60 starboard. And we're sort of going, and hilariously, we do it with our children. We've done it with our children, which is why, to answer Sue's question, would any of them consider my kids following you into my career? No, because they all think it's incredibly boring to follow your mother doing whatever she wants to do. So interestingly, my son, talking about learning styles and doing things differently, I'm really proud of him, actually. He was at college and he was hating it. He's severely dyslexic. And we were still pushing him down that route because it was the route that we felt he should be on. And he's finally stood up and said, I don't want to do this anymore. And he's basically become taking himself out and becoming an apprentice. He's found a job himself. He has put in his papers. He's been accepted on this apprenticeship scheme, and he started it last Monday. So I'm actually really proud of the fact that actually he did have the strength of character to say, I don't want to carry on doing what I'm doing, and I am very different from you guys, and I need to do my own thing. So I'm really proud that he's done that.
No, that's nice. I mean, there's some great studies. I think it's Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book, and one of the sections he talked about was this thing of dyslexia. I don't know if you've come across that reading.
Actually, I've heard of people. I haven't heard of that book of this bit.
Yeah, he talks about how because they have to put so much effort in, because patterns don't fall into place as easily. They're just so used to working harder than the rest that when things like open up a little bit, they're just that much further ahead. So I know a couple of friends and family members also. I've got a good friend, Vanna, who, when I want to find out something and I'm not seeing it, it all makes sense to me. Then I just contact Vanna and I say, have a look at this. What do you think? And he just gives me some left field answer. He's dyslexic. He works in a team of engineers and he stands out with the bright idea. In my mind, he always has the good idea. So I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, my husband's dyslexic as well. And and he's always thought slightly differently as well, which is probably why he likes me, because he thinks different.
Cool. So we got Ella joining us from the USA. Hello, Ella. We didn't get to the end of the point I wanted to talk about with fear, because you're right. You do get to the point where you compartmentalize it, action drills take over, and you just save yourself in the moment. And it's not a fear-driven thing. It's a role. It's a drills-based. You've practiced the skill. You execute the skill. You get out of Dodge, and you live another day. However, you do compartmentalize that whole event in your mind too, and it might take you a few days or weeks later. And in general, pilots are quite good at blocking and chunking and well, I'm going to work now, so that means switch off, and that means focus on work. I'm going to work for the next 18 hours flying through the night. I know I'm not going to sleep well, I'm not going to eat well, drink well, all that, but that's just what I do. But there is that time where you unpack it again later. I had a very, very minor incident that happened to me as an airline pilot, and it was a cracked window. And I just thought that for a while afterwards, that did we make the right decision? And I kind of beat myself up about it for about 2 weeks, just thinking about the decision we made after. So in the moment, you go through the actions, but you do think through so coming back from combat tours, etc., or your flying training, share some of your thoughts on this idea that you peg it in the moment, but you come back to it and you chew on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the questions, yes, Sue asked, have you ever had a close shave flying? And actually, I'm just going to talk you through exactly that, because it's that whole error chain. I'm sure many of you have heard of James Reason and the Swiss cheese model, or error chain theory, and how do we break the chain? Well, I was flying in Goose Bay in Canada, and we were on the operational conversion unit. We'd just gone out to Goose Bay, and we'd been told, and I was actually doing a flight, bizarrely, I was doing a flight with Rob again. My goodness, he's there everywhere. And we were on a final air combat sortie. We were practicing it out there. And we tried to get one more merge in. And we were told by air traffic control that the weather was getting really poor, that there were thunderstorms coming in. And actually, you know, we needed to recover back to base. But if we didn't get this last merge in, then we wouldn't be able to pass this flight, and we'd have to redo the flight again. So we said, okay, we'll just one quick merge, you know. So we did this quick merge. We came back to base, and we're now on fuel minimums. Thunderstorms have come in. Goose Bay, very long runway, but it's actually broken up into two halves at the time. I don't know if it still is, but half of it was ridged and half of it was smooth. And they said, if it's ever poor weather, just land on the ridge side, because then you won't get aquaplaning and water pooling. Sure. You won't get contamination of the runway. So that was fine. So I'm coming in. Air traffic control then said to me, would you accept a talk down from a trainee? And of course, being a pilot and being a yes, can do person, of course. So I said yes. And as I'm coming through cloud, I mean, we are getting bumped all over the place. It's really, really brutal. And we're coming down, boom, boom, you know, and they're going 5 degrees left. I'm thinking, God, that's quite a lot for a PAR, you know, for a precision approach radar, where we're normally hearing 1 or 2 degrees left or right in the final stages. We're hearing 5 and then 10. Yeah. And I popped out of the cloud at 300 feet. And I looked up, and we were lined up with the apron where all the aircraft are lined up, and the runway is over there to my right. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, but we're on fuel minimum. So I think, right, it's fine. So I brake hard right, because I'm in a jet. I can, not an airliner. Don't try this at home, folks. So I brake right, and then I land smack on the centre line. I thought, oh yes. Of course, I engaged thrust reverse, and as I did so, with horror, my one of my wheels aquaplaned completely on the smooth side of the runway, but the ridge side were caught and didn't aquaplane. And we skidded through 90 degrees, and we're now going at 160 miles an hour down the runway sideways. And my navigator yelled, firstly we yelled loss of control, where my brain then went into the complete boom, boom, do the drills, absolutely fine. So cancel thrust reverse. We were still skidding. At which point my navigator yelled, I'm not ejecting yet, which was possibly the most worrying, basically, thing I'd ever heard on the radio. We're not ejecting yet, because instantly I thought, oh, we should be. Oh my goodness, we should be ejecting. So I sort of thought about putting my hand on my ejection seat. But there's a really big difference between having an emergency in the air, where it's a respond, to doing it on the ground in slow motion. Because we had about 30 seconds where we carried on going, and I realized that it was starting to come under control. I touched the brake, and we flicked through, and we started to slow down. And when we came to a standstill, we were lined up exactly with the taxiway to leave the runway. So I powered up, and we left the runway. Anyway, we then started sort of laughing like maniacs, basically, because the fear came out at that point. Because you had 30 seconds of feeling like we could potentially be about to eject. And there was a German Tornado that had recently gone off the runway as well. It was at the end of the runway. And I mean, Goose Bay was notorious for accidents as well. There were a lot of different threats. But talking about that error chain, after the event, I looked back and thought, Mandy, you could have done that so differently. You could have said no. You could have not had the final merge. You could have said, we'll accept it because we need the fuel, because the weather is poor. We could have not accepted a talk down from air traffic controller. We could, you know, all of these things. And I just think, would I have done it differently? Yes. So my big one there was a really big learning point. And I kept on thinking, I use the word just a lot in that one. I can just make it. We could just do this. And if you hear yourself saying just, don't. Just stop and really think about what you're doing, because the chances are, if you can just make it, you probably can't.
Yeah, that's a good one. You know, when you started the story and they said, well, let's just do one more. They already start as a pilot, you know, as a military pilot, you already know that, well, fuel's an issue to begin with. As you get airborne in an aircraft like a Tornado, fuel's an issue. You don't just add anything to a sortie. So that's, and then you're adding all those variables. But also that time on the runway going sideways, we had a classic case in I think it was in the 80s in South Africa, and we were still at war in a Mirage. One of the pilots went off the end of the runway, and the seat just got triggered because the nose collapsed and the thing went down, and the seat triggered, and the person got severely injured out of it. So that's also a factor. Even though you're safe on the ground, if you're flying ejection seat aircraft, you've got that concern too. So just for the listeners, that it's not all roses once the wheels are on the ground, because when the aircraft stopped and you're getting out, then it's safe.
We've got a comment here from Mike saying, and Mike, I've raised my hat to you. He's a Martin Baker time member, which means that Mike is actually ejected. So I hope it was a smooth landing for you, and that you got away with it unscathed, Mike. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks for joining, Mike. Yeah, it's not I mean, you get to keep that seat or whatever's left of it, and you get your tie and everything. But that thing, quite practically, it saved your life. It's a wonderful tool, that Martin Baker. It really is a great thing. So we got some people sharing their comments, saying they're enjoying the stories. Thank you for that. Now, I also wanted to touch on going into the role now, because where we sit now as pilots, there's loads and loads of pilots that are sitting at home or trying something else, because the industry, certainly the airline industry, is wrecked. There's lots of transferable skills, and you're seeing that more and more too. There's people sharing messages of transferable skills for pilots, and I remember the gentleman that Jeremy invited you to Cape Town as well. He is specifically asked me to bring all my pilot friends. He can use them because he has in the property business in Cape Town, and he can recognize the skills. What is your tips, or what are your thoughts on this idea of using this vast pool of pilots that are sitting at home, and they have skills and abilities? I mean, you and I recognize it. We try and transfer skills to boardrooms and to execs in training and talks. What are your thoughts on what pilots should do, or what other people should do in getting hold of pilots to help them?
Well, it's interesting actually, because my husband's been involved in a fantastic group that's been set up called the Resilient Pilot, and it's been set up by pilots to basically say to anybody that wants to, they're providing mentors, because ultimately we've got a lot of people that have spent an awful lot of money on their training. Perhaps they got to the very final stages, and then they haven't been able to get their license, even though they're £150,000 down. They haven't been able to get it in that final stages, and that's going to hit hard. So we really need to look out for people's mental health in this situation as well. And so they've been doing a lot of counselling. But what Craig, my husband's been finding, which has been lovely, is a lot of people saying, do you know what? It's not changing quickly. So I'm going to have to look at my skill set, and I'm going to have to either retrain for something else, or basically say, okay, you know what? I've got some excellent skills as things like project management. There's a lot we can do in the leadership space. The skill sets that you have as a pilot, certainly from ex-military as well, you are right up there at the top echelons of society, basically, and you've got so many skills that you probably don't realize that you have, even down to the things like human factors training. We're up there in human factors training, and in fact I'm going into London tomorrow to do some filming for a company all about finance. I know nothing about finance. I put my hands up and I said, we've got this amazing platform, we want to capture all this information. I looked at this website. A lot of it was on regulation, on compliance. And I said to them, I'm not sure what I can offer. Feel the fear, do it anyway. And so they said, well, why don't you just put together a script? And I thought, oh, no, I never talk from a script. Anyway, I put together a script, and they contacted me back today and said, it is unbelievable. We haven't got anything in this space, and it's basically all around leadership. And all I'm doing is talking about the human factor elements. So there's a lot that we can share with colleagues on performance as well. But actually, we have skills that we can take into any marketplace at all.
Well, I'm going to ask you the next question. I'm going to put this picture up because it's just a lovely photo, and it might remind you of your time there. But what I like about this picture is, okay, so this is your tornadoes there in the background. The squadrons all stand. I imagine the deployed squadrons all standing there. It looks to me about 50 odd people, but that gives you a sense of what the Air Force is about. It's a squadron. It's frontline. It's operational. Just in the way that the postures that the people are standing. I would imagine not too many girls there as well.
I think it might be the only one. Yeah. Yeah,
but it also, so if I put the question another way, most of the listeners are perhaps not pilots. And so what is a way you can attract a pilot or a group of pilots, or attract the skills that pilots have or aviation industry has to help your business? I mean, I don't know if you can, if you want to maybe broach an answer on that, but as you see this picture of the Air Force, things like structure and routine and discipline and SOPs and things, they come to my mind. But what would you say is a way to attract pilots to come and help out on something like banking?
So the most important thing I think most pilots would actually find appealing is the culture, because you've come from an organization where generally we have a really open, a learning culture, a culture whereby people go the extra mile for other people around them. So there's a real team ethos to it. And, for many of my colleagues, I spoke to one recently who's gone into a very, very different world. It's called a company called Salesforce, a global company. And he said what appealed to him was the culture. And you can tell the culture. I've worked in a lot of different companies, especially when I do my speaking. I'll go in and I can sense the culture within, you must find this as well, Alex, within minutes of arriving. Just the atmosphere in the air. And I think you can look at your culture that your own companies have and say, would my company be appealing to a pilot? And if it's not, what can I do about it? Because actually, you want your company to have that culture whereby people go, that's a company I want to work for. And if you haven't, then why not?
Yeah. You're talking about Andy, by the way, Salesforce.
I am. Yeah. How do you know Andy?
Andy Wright. No. So Andy Wright put me in touch with Ben Murphy, and we had a nice conversation. So through my parents' friends of friends.
I was at university with Andy. And in fact, the other day I did a really big cycle ride. It's called the South Downs Way, 100 miles off track in 2 days, 50 miles a day, nearly killed me. And he said, Mandy, got any top tips? I just saw that he did it yesterday or last weekend. And he said, you're right, it's brutal. I was like, yes. He said, out of the 6 of them, only 2 made it. So I was thinking, oh yeah. Then.
Cool. Well, I'm going to put this up, but I'm going to come back to the story about Andy now. So Jacques Adamo this is such a good platform, Alex. Love your initiative and your angle of attack. Excuse the pun. Keep it up. So he was a very senior controller in the Air Force when I was a flying instructor. Well, actually, when I was a student as well, but as a flying instructor, even more senior by then, and somebody I worked with quite a lot, and a great man too. So thanks for joining us, Jacques.
Thanks, Jack.
Now the thing with Andy. So got a funny story in the end, because so my parents are friends with, I think it's his in-laws. It's quite far back, but anyway, the message got through that this gentleman Andy knows someone in the Red Arrows, and I was going to an air show in Italy in 2010. The Italians were having their 45th anniversary of the Freccia Tricolori, and the Silver Falcons were invited. And I had just left the Air Force, but I got my travel tickets with South African Airways, so I went along. So through that whole process of trying to get hold of the Red Arrows then and set up a meeting, got hold of Andy, and then he put me on to Ben. Anyway, fast forward all these years later, and about 2 months ago, I get hold of Ben, and I interview Ben on the show as well. And that was in June sometime. And I posted it on LinkedIn, and Andy and I connected on LinkedIn too with the Salesforce. He writes great articles transferring military skills to corporate, etc. And he says, so after I had a great talk with Ben, a little post after the interview, he says, oh, good for you. I've been trying to get hold of him for months.
Do you know who he had to put up with instead? He could put up with me, because he basically said, Mandy, I've arrived at this company and we've set up this like a network called the Military Network. We've set up this group of talks called Pull Up a Sandbag. He said, will you speak at it? And he got me on a Friday night. He basically saw I posted a post on Facebook with me slightly tipsy. So he thought he'd seize the moment and say, will I come and speak? And of course I went, yes, of course I will. So he got a lovely freebie speech out of me to speak to all of his colleagues. So there you go. Ben might have not been available, but he got me instead.
Well, there we go. I'm sure a prettier person to look at anyway, so that's cool.
Oh, don't let Ben hear you say that. It's certainly not Percy's wife would disagree, I'm sure.
So then, we've spent nearly 55 minutes talking about all things flying and fun things, writing and stuff, and I haven't really broached the subject much about the bit that stands out about you is that you're one of the first to fly in these combat zones, tornado pilots as a lady. I don't know if you want to, as a bit of a parting closing thought on that. You've I mean, you pioneered a lot of things from just getting into the Air Force as a pilot to begin with, and having to help them change the recruiting and the application process. But I mean, just talk through the sense in general, like these photos. There's one girl. My pilot's course had 2 girls, 30 pilots, 2 of them were girls. You must have had that all the way through, and certainly a few years ahead of me as well, where the times were even more different back then. Just if you can give like a roundup, what did you write about as a summary version of life as an Air Force pilot as a girl in your book?
Yeah, so it's interesting. In my book, I definitely didn't want it to be sort of a sexist rant, because
Sure.
I hands on heart did not feel like the Air Force was like that for me. As I've written it, lots of people said, my goodness, you had to put up with a lot. But I was like, it didn't feel like it at the time. I think you grow a very thick skin, and you just sort of accept it for what it is. And it wasn't that anybody in the Air Force was doing anything for a vindictive reason. It was just that they hadn't had women. So it just hadn't been thought through particularly. For example, no toilets, no female toilets. No, once we got to Iraq and Kuwait, there was no female toilet, female shower. You were just in the queue in your towel with all the other guys. But again, it didn't really bother me. I think I was just very thick-skinned to it. When we were going through flying training, again, it was Rob and a guy called Tristan. They were the ones that brought up the fact that actually a lot of the instructors were all making individual comments to me. Again, they were sort of, I hadn't really noticed. They said, but Mans, we noticed every single one of them makes one comment. So it could be something as minor as, oh, we can tell which jet's Mandy's, it's not parked straight, all the banter. None of them meant vindictively, but you put 20 instructors' comments on one person every day. And actually, they said, we're finding it a bit tiresome. So they spoke to the boss and said, we don't really like it. And the boss said, I apologize. And of course, no one had meant anything. And I think that's the whole point, is that it's just unconscious, but we're not in that space anymore. And people would not put up with it anymore, because actually it's been raised to the top levels of people's consciousness. So actually there had to be changes that were made. And we were very lucky that those changes were made. But you do need pioneers to actually push that ahead. I mean, I wore male long johns under my flying suit with a Y front for the entirety of my service career, which are just not very comfy. They cut your hips in half and you've got this double bit of material at the front. So, down to not being able to have a wee in an aeroplane, which they're still trying to come up with a solution for. So there are things that needed to change. But ultimately, I think the forces as a whole and aviation as a whole is a much better place. But there's still very few females doing it. I think when we look at, say, let's take EasyJet. When Carolyn McCall was the boss of EasyJet, her mission was to go from 7% on the flight deck female to 12%. And she didn't make it. So you're still looking at around about 10% of your pilots are women, which is so few and far between when it's a job, nothing to do with strength. It's basically people making the assumption. And I speak to a lot of schools, and I believe it goes back down to almost primary school level, when you talk about a pilot and all of the children will assume it's a man you're talking about. So these sorts of things are ingrained in people right from early stages of their lives. So it's an interesting one. But it was challenging at times, Alex. I'm glad that things have changed for the better. But never did I ever feel that I was hard done by as a consequence of being a woman. I loved my time in the Air Force, and I can't imagine a better career. Oh,
that's wonderful. I'll get to one or two of these last comments as we start wrapping it up. But just my follow-up question on that really is: do you tend to end up in these spaces where you are sort of pro getting girls in the cockpit? Obviously, whether you choose it or not, you're in the limelight for that. Is that a thing that you focus on, is trying to get these sort of STEM subjects and girls in aviation too?
Well, it did start off like that. And actually, that's where I think a lot of people would like me to be. It's purely in STEM, purely in women's diversity groups and things like that. But one thing I have made sure that I don't is that when I speak as a pilot and not as a female pilot. Because although I do mention at the start, and I say I was the second woman to fly the Tornado on the front line, one of only 5 ever to have done it. That's it. It's then not mentioned again. Yeah. And it's not mentioned again for a very good reason, because I want to get the human factor elements of the teamwork, leadership, communication skills, and decision-making under pressure out. I don't want it to be about a woman in a man's world. And I think it speaks for itself that you're not making it a feature, because otherwise the messages just get lost in the men to get turned off because it's like another sexist rant. And the women, you know, they like it. That's great. But actually, I think it's about more than that. You don't need to spell those messages out. Purely by having done what I've done, I'm there to say that this is what you can achieve. And I don't think that has to be spelled out. So, yes, I am often asked to speak at STEM events, diversity events, but it's certainly not been limited to that by any stretch, no.
Well, you've answered my next question in the answer of the first question, so thank you for that. You know, you mentioned up front, but you don't focus on it, is the question I was going to ask you. So Rachel's joining us saying, Rachel Smart must say good night off on aeromedical tasking. It's been great to listen in. Mandy, would love to talk human factors sometime. Cheers, Rachel. Well, I don't know if you know Rachel, but certainly she's on LinkedIn. You can find her there.
I'll definitely connect with you, Rachel, definitely. I mean, I love human factors. I can't get enough of it.
Yeah, that's good. And Martin Baker, Mike is commented again. My cousin was a squadron leader, retired now. Rob Joy was the manager of the Red Arrows for 3 years, so that's great.
Yeah.
And Ella from the States is saying, in the 80s, I worked at the South African Air Force SWAT Corps Air Force Base, worked in the technical bookstore, many of the pilots and Amendments to Fly. I love pilot stories. Well, I do too, and Mandy does too. We love sharing the pilot stories.
Yeah, in fact, Ella, I can really empathise with you there, because when I'd had my children, I got a job actually at a place called Handling Squadron, and it was looking after the aircraft document set for Tornado. So I was the one that wrote the manuals, and everyone said, oh, it's such a boring job. But actually, I loved it because I always say you do what's right for you at the right stage of life for you. And for the right stage of life, I needed to be a mum. I needed to do a second line job, and I needed to focus on my 4-month-old and my 20-month-old babies, you know, and I couldn't be back at the front line. So actually working on technical documents suited me down to the ground that period. Yeah.
That's great. And Jeremy, your host in Cape Town, is saying because he wants the pilots, he's saying attitude, agility, you have the skills in abundance. So anyone is looking to come and join Jeremy's team with property, he's looking for you if you've got your pilot skills. And Safaraz is saying, Mandy, you've got to watch the film called Gunjan Sajena. It's an autobiography of the first female fighter pilot, first female Air Force pilot in India. Gunjan Sajena.
Actually, I had a really interesting one because I did a podcast called The Armchair Strategist, and it was about, and I was speaking to one of the first females that was in the Indian Air Force, and the two of us were being interviewed on it. And so I'm surprised you didn't mention that film. That's it. So I've written it down. I will have a look at it. Fantastic.
Yeah, great. And then, Ella's saying, thanks, good team, enjoy that. And Mandy, it's been wonderful chatting with you. There's still more things I wanted to talk about, but I think I've used up all my time with you. So it's been wonderful. You have places to stay in all over the world from this little conversation.
Johannesburg. Oh, that's it. I'm off. South Africa. Can't wait, guys.
Now, if people want to get hold of a copy of your book, do they just send you an email? Where do they get it?
This book, yes. Book. Well, thank you, Alex. That's very kind of you. It's called An Officer, Not a Gentleman. Loads of really good stories in there. It's one of the easiest reads you can ever imagine. Everyone's just said it's unputdownable, and it's just available on Amazon. So that's probably your easiest way of doing it. Is just go onto Amazon and download it, either as an ebook or wait for the audiobook to come out, and you can go to sleep listening to my dulcet tones of an evening.
Not at all. But that was my last question, actually, from that audiobook. So, did you have did you ever have that feeling when you were recording it to just change a little bit? You know, because that sentence bugged me.
Oh, it's really funny because actually, there's bits in my book that I do in my speech, especially a story at the end, all around a girl called Emily. And as I was reading the book, I almost went into my speech, and I kept having to read myself back in. And I thought, well, no one will care because actually, it's my book. So. You're getting some additional extras in the audiobook where I've slipped in a couple of expressions that perhaps weren't in there, especially a few yee-haws that are definitely not in the book.
Do you know Malcolm? I'm going back to Malcolm Gladwell again. If you got any tips, anybody, to get hold of Malcolm Gladwell, I want him on the High Performance Team show too. His audiobook that came out about 6 months ago, the name's just escaped me, but his latest book, he read it himself. But he did something interesting too. He actually brought in bits of media from elsewhere, like there was a news report, and he got the audio in from you can hear police sirens, and down here in West Avenue today, the police have arrived on the scene. It was just interesting, and I wondered, you could do something similar. You could have a tornado flying by with a into your audiobook, not jingles.
I do sound effects in it, but they're not quite as natural. At one point, I'm going, yeah, and I'm thinking, well, never mind. That was one of the chapters I had to redo.
Wonderful. Mandy, it's been wonderful chatting with you. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you all the best of success with your book and your audiobook.
Thanks so much, Alex, and great to meet you. Some brilliant questions. Thanks for all your input, guys.
Cheers. Well, everybody, it's been fun. Thank you for joining. It's been nice that there's been so much debate and interaction too. Appreciate your time. Until next time, please stay safe.